After only 37 days since the last Starship launch, this afternoon we watched the 6th attempt, and it was very eventful. Due to the fact that this launch is set to be the last time we see a V1 Starship fly, the company made some final alterations to the flight profile and the vehicle itself to gather as much data as possible before the switch to V2. This included a more aggressive booster catch attempt, a steeper and therefore hotter ship re-entry, a Raptor relight in space, etc. Here I'll go more in depth into the entire launch, what exactly happened, and more. Unlike all 5 previous flight tests, which occurred early in the morning, the countdown for today's launch began late in the afternoon, just a few hours before sunset in South Texas. As the countdown passed through T-minus 40 seconds, there was no hold with everything a go for launch. We then saw the water deluge system activate, and seconds later, Raptor engine ignition. Starship then lifted off the pad and soon cleared the launch tower. From here, it began accelerating and gaining altitude. Looking at the bottom graphic, we could see that all 33 Raptor engines on the booster were lit and firing as expected. At T plus 45 seconds, a ground view gave another angle confirming that all the engines were firing. Not long after, just past 1 minute into the launch, we got a call from Mission Control that the vehicle had passed through max Q, the moment of peak mechanical stress on the rocket. The next big milestone was around T plus 2 minutes and 30 seconds, where MECO occurred, which SpaceX calls most engines cut off. Here all but the center 3 Raptor engines on the booster shut off. This is followed seconds later by hot staging, where the ship ignites its 6 Raptor engines while still attached to the booster. The vehicles then separated, with the booster set to return to the launch site and ship continuing to accelerate and gain altitude. Importantly, right around T plus 2 minutes and 40 seconds, commentators on SpaceX's official livestream said that the tower is go for catch and that the return flag is set for true. At this point, it seemed like the booster was set to once again attempt another catch. Right after separating, the booster swung around and the boost back burn commenced with 13 engines firing as expected. At T plus 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the middle ring of engines on the booster shut down, leaving just the inner 3. Those final engines then shut down about 15 seconds later. At this point, everything was still going as planned and was matching up with exactly what we saw on Flight 5. That was until T plus 4 minutes and 25 seconds when SpaceX called out booster offshore divert. This means that at that point, the decision was made to send the booster to the water off the coast of the launch site rather than back to the pad. By T plus 6 minutes, this had taken effect and the booster was already nearing the water and slowing down rapidly. An angle from the ground showcased the re-entry heating that the bottom of the booster is exposed to during this process. At T plus 6 minutes and 35 seconds, the landing burn began with all 13 engines lighting. Seconds later, the middle ring shut off, leaving the center 3 for a soft touchdown in the water. Due to the fact that the booster was so close to the shore, we got some great views of it actually making contact with the water. It entered nearly perfectly vertical before finally starting to tip over. Unfortunately, SpaceX cut the footage back to the ship right before it fell horizontally. Other angles and images did show a large explosion right as it tipped over, followed by a fire that eventually went out. As far as why they didn't attempt to catch, SpaceX pointed out that distinct vehicle and pad criteria needed to be met prior to a return and catch of the Super Heavy booster, which required healthy systems on the booster and tower and a final manual command from the mission's flight director. They also were quoted saying, "If this command is not sent prior to the completion of the boost back burn, or if automated health checks show unacceptable conditions with Super Heavy or the tower, the booster will default to a trajectory that takes it to a landing burn and soft splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico." This means this time around, something either with the booster or tower was not perfect, which meant the booster likely defaulted to a safer trajectory in the water. To put in perspective the margin involved, it was revealed that on the last flight, which featured a successful booster catch, the booster was just 1 second away from aborting due to a misconfigured spin gas abort. While not ideal that we couldn't see a second catch, it did demonstrate a successful abort and soft landing in the water. While all of this was going on, the ship was still firing its 6 Raptor engines. That was until T plus 7 minutes and 57 seconds when the 3 vacuum Raptor engines shut off. This was followed by the center 3 about 30 seconds later. From here, the ship began its long coast phase around the Earth. This eventually led to a first for the Starship program with the planned Raptor relight. At T plus 37 minutes and 46 seconds, we heard the call for Raptor relight followed by a bright light and the engine igniting. Seconds later, they shut it down, completing the brief test. The purpose was to help prove the technology for future Starship orbital missions. With this complete, another 10 minutes or so passed by before Starship began to re-enter the atmosphere. During that time, we got a few angles of the first ever Starship payload, a banana which was hung up within the payload bay. Focusing back on the launch, as the vehicle began re-entry, we could see plasma building up around the heat shield and flaps. This time around, we got a few different camera angles showing the flaps, side of the ship, and even an interior camera next to the Raptor engines. At T plus 48 minutes, the call came out that Starship was just about to enter the peak heating phase of re-entry. At this point, it was traveling around 26,000 kilometers an hour at 75 kilometers in altitude. The commentators then confirmed that the heat shield on this ship is not quite as upgraded as what we saw on Flight 5. In other words, they decided to reinforce some specific heat shield areas, but were aware that it might not be enough. They wanted to determine exactly what the ship could take and how much they could get away with. At T plus 52 minutes and 50 seconds, Mission Control called out that Starship was halfway through the peak heating phase. At this point, the ship seemed to still be in good condition without any visible burn-through on the flaps like had been seen in previous flights. We could also for the first time see the Earth in the background during re-entry, thanks to the fact that the later launch time and it was early in the morning around the landing location. At T plus 58 minutes and 10 seconds, the call came that Starship was on a good trajectory and that external temperatures were coming down. They then provided the additional camera angles showing the flaps where it looked like there might have been a bit of burn-through on the tip of the forward flap. In another close-up, they confirmed that there was definitely some extra heating on that specific location. Fortunately, by the time it became obvious, the ship was starting to cool down rapidly. By T plus 1 hour, 2 minutes, and 44 seconds, Starship was slowing down quickly as it passed under 1,000 kilometers an hour. Here, the nose of the ship began to tip down, getting closer to the aggressive angle the company was aiming for. Normally, at this point, Starship would just belly flop horizontally to slow itself down. On this flight, however, they wanted a much more aggressive angle to help with future ship catch attempts. At T plus 1 hour and 5 minutes, the ship had leveled out to nearly a horizontal position based on the graphic and views from the camera. It then lit its 3 center Raptor engines, immediately swinging the bottom of the ship to the opposite side before orienting itself vertically and touching down softly in the water. This time around, SpaceX provided some live external cameras both from a buoy and a separate angle. This combined with it being daytime meant we got some of the best views yet of the landing process. We can also safely assume that it was extremely accurate, based on the pre-positioned stationary cameras right next to it. The fact that it survived re-entry is actually quite a big deal. Before the launch, SpaceX was quoted saying, "We're going to fly the ship at an aggressive angle of attack once it's moving slower than the speed of sound. This means we'll be flying nose down instead of our usual belly flop orientation during final descent. This will no doubt stress the limits of the flap's ability to maintain control, but it will be a chance to get real flight data on what our limits actually are. So to put it as bluntly as possible, do not be surprised if this is not a smooth flight to splashdown today. We are intentionally looking for how far we can push and discover the vehicle's true limits as we plan for future ship return and catch," they said. With this in mind, the ship definitely performed very well and supports future catch attempts. This was also the last V1 Starship, meaning the next time we see this vehicle fly, it'll feature a significant number of upgrades. SpaceX just launched Starship's 6th flight test and it was very eventful. We didn't get to see another booster catch, but instead a soft splashdown off the coast of the launch site. As for the ship, despite its heat shield and high angle of attack, it managed to make it through in one piece and successfully touch down in the water. We will have to wait and see how it progresses and the impact it has on the space industry. Thank you very much for watching.